Hi, this is Stuart Talley. I'm here today to do another update on the ongoing Pinnacle metal-on-metal hip trial that's currently pending right now in Dallas, Texas. Today, the plaintiffs put on some more witnesses in the case, and we heard from a Professor Drumwright, who is a professor at a college, and she specializes in marketing and business ethics. And she was called by the plaintiff to give testimony about the way that DePuy went about marketing their hips. She had a lot of very interesting testimony about how marketing and advertising impacts the decisions of patients as well as doctors. Millions of dollars was spent on marketing by DePuy, and their position in the case has been that marketing is irrelevant. It doesn't matter what the ads say, because the ads are, a lot of them are false and fraudulent and have false information in them. So their position is that the ads don't matter, that doctors don't decide what hip to put into a person based on an advertisement. So Dr. Drumwright was called to talk about how marketing does influence doctors, that it does make a difference. And there's lots of actual published literature on this issue that she spoke about. She also talked about DePuy's sort of overall marketing scheme, which involved paying doctors to have dinners and talk to other doctors. And so basically what they would do is they would pay money to a doctor to basically have a meeting with other doctors in the area, and they would tell them about the new metal-on-metal hips and promote it. The problem is that many of these doctors that were promoting the hips were receiving royalty payments. Millions of dollars from many of the doctors. And that was never disclosed to the other doctors who were showing up at these meetings. There were other issues as well, as far as DePuy having medical journal articles written by doctors where they would ghostwrite the articles. So that was, most of the day was Dr. Drumwright. There was also some cross-examination of her. And one of the things that DePuy made a point of during this part of the case is that the doctors who actually did the operations on the 5 plaintiffs never were present at any of the meetings or the dinners where doctors were presenting. A lot of them said they never saw any of the advertisements for the hips. So that was their main point that they wanted to make. Dr. Drumwright really sort of pressed the point that in the medical community, when you're talking about medical devices, there is sort of a consensus that's reached. When one surgeon in a surgical group starts using a certain product, word spreads to other surgeons that it's a good product, and they start using it. So it's not so much that you saw an ad in a medical journal saying the DePuy metal-on-metal is good, but if you see somebody who saw the ad that started using it, you might start using it. And so that was sort of the theme of the day. After Dr. Drumwright, the plaintiffs called the head of clinical research for DePuy at the time that the Pinnacle was being developed. Her name is Dr. Pam Plore. And Dr. Plore was in charge of clinical studies. And so what happened with the Pinnacle, a clinical study is a study on people, where they actually look at the hip being put into people and they see what happens. And there was a big study that DePuy used called the PIN study, P-I-N. And basically in this study, it was a study that was done on 1,100 patients that received metal-on-metal Pinnacles, and they looked at the survivor rate of those hips. And the data from this PIN study that DePuy paid for was used in marketing, and it was used all over the place in marketing. And the main statistic from that study that they reported over and over again in all their advertising was that after 5 years, 99.9% of the Pinnacles that had been implanted were still there. They hadn't been revised. And so the plaintiff's attorney went to great lengths to get into that study and talk about the irregularities with that study. According to Dr. Plore, there should have been, out of the 1,100 patients, to get that 99.9% number, there had to have been one revision. And so all of these documents had been gone through by the plaintiff's attorney, and it turns out that there were a lot more than one revision that occurred with these hips. At one point during the testimony, we were up to 8 revisions. And for some reason, DePuy was still using the 99.9% number, even though they knew there were 8 revisions in this study. I think that the point was made very clearly that 99.9% figure was just wrong. Dr. Plauer refused to admit that it was wrong. She would say it was inaccurate, but she wouldn't say it was false or fraudulent or wrong. And so there was a lot of back and forth with the plaintiff's attorney and the witness on that issue. There was also lots of irregularities in the study. For example, one of the things, one of the documents that they got into was a case report for one of the patients in the study. And so the way this worked was a patient would go in, they would have a Pinnacle metal-on-metal hip put in, and then they would come back at regular intervals to visit the doctor after their surgery. And the doctor would fill out a form saying, I saw the patient on this day, they were doing well, and they would come up with what they call a Harris hip score that tells you how good the hip's doing, how their hip is feeling, essentially. And they would take these forms and they would submit it to DePuy. And that's how they kept track of how many of these hips were still in place after they had been put in initially. So one of the forms that they were looking at was for a patient where the doctor put the hip in 2006, and there were several reports where the doctor said that he had examined the patient in 2007, 2008, and 2009, and the hip was doing great. Well, there was a document that the plaintiff's attorneys were able to come up with showing that the patient showed up at the surgeon's office in 2010 and reported that the hip had actually been revised back in 2007, before the doctor said that he actually examined the patient. So what I think was demonstrated through this testimony and through the documents was that this doctor was actually making up data. He had falsely reported that he had seen the patient and that the patient was doing well. The patient was not doing well. The patient actually had the hip revised just a year after it was put in. So that was the kind of testimony that came out today. I think it was another good day for the plaintiffs. There were a lot of problems with this PIN study that was made very clear through the testimony and through the documents. I think we're going to hear more about this PIN study as the case progresses, because it really was a study that was used heavily by DePuy to market these hips and to get doctors to start using it. If you have any questions about the trial, about the litigation or the process, or you have a DePuy metal-on-metal hip and you have any questions, feel free to give us a call. You can reach us at the phone number on the screen, or you can fill out one of our online forms and we'll get back to you right away.